Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast. I've got Ashwin with me all the way from the United States, and we've got with us a guest that needs no introduction. Both Ashwin and I, our mothers teach history. We both love cricket, and we are delighted to have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Ramachandra Guha on the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast. Dr. Guha, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Guha, I mean, where does one even start with this? You're a historian, you're a cricket writer, you've written a number of books, but I mean, I think you describe yourself as a test cricket tragic in a number of your books. So perhaps we can start with the recent series win by the Indian cricket team in Australia. I know you say that you don't follow, or you're not hyper nationalistic in a sense, but where does this rank amongst the great test series of all the test series that you have watched over your cricket watching career?
So, first of all, I'd say this series has been a victory for India in terms of results, but in moral and aesthetic terms, more a victory for Test cricket. So, those who have followed it on the radio or podcasts or Cricket Info or watched it will remember incidents, episodes, sessions, innings, spells, catches from this series for years and years and years. Whereas I'm sure both Ashwin and you, DJ, have forgotten what happened in the last IPL final already. All right. So in that sense, it's a victory for Test cricket. In terms of what India has done over the years, there's only one series that ranks with it, which is the 1971 series win in England, which is 50 years ago. Now, there's been a great deal of excitement about this win because of our humiliating loss in the first test and the extraordinary resilience shown by our lower order in the third test, drawing a match against all the odds, and then, of course, the victory in the last test. So everyone is saying greatest ever, greatest ever. No, I think 71 probably comes close. You know, we have what's called recency bias. Some dramatic, extraordinary event happens last month or last year, it's all in our minds. For example, the pandemic. All right, now we're living through the pandemic, but history will probably judge that this pandemic was nowhere near as serious as the Spanish flu of 1918-19. But because we're living through it, we are suffering through it, we tend to take it much more seriously. Likewise, with events that we exult in, not just events that depress us, events that we exult in and celebrate. If they haven't happened recently, we tend to think they are more important than they are. So this is certainly an extraordinarily important win for India. Is it the greatest ever, or will we rank 71 higher? History will judge. Let me tell your younger listeners some facts about 1971. In 1971, when we went to England, the previous series, we lost 3-0 in 3 matches in England, 67. The one before that, 1959, we lost 5-0. So we lost the last 8 test matches we played in England. On the other hand, we won the last series we played in Australia. Right. So our win in 71 was that more unexpected. In 1971, England had just come. Yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry, I was saying 1971 is 14 years before I was born, which is why it's such a privilege having you on this podcast. I think this was the team led by Ajit Wadekar, wasn't it?
Correct. That's
in 1971 that won that series. But in terms of being a fairy tale ending, I mean, it may not be the greatest series win almost, but this was almost like someone had scripted a fairy tale from the depths of 36 all out to the dramatic draw at Sydney with people like basically having one arm and one leg left at the end of it. And then the unheralded debutants coming to the fore, and Navdeep Saini with his injury and Rishabh Pant scoring those. I mean, just in terms of being a fairy tale, I don't know whether 71 captured that emotion as well for you.
Well, Captain, I'll come to that. So 71 had extraordinary amount of drama. In the first test played at Lords, we needed about 30 or 40 to win with 2 wickets in hand, one of whom was Solkar. So, but Solkar and 2 tail-enders, but Solkar was, a brilliant like MS Dhoni, fantastic at nurturing the tail and batting with the tail. But then the rain came. The second match, we were going to lose. We had to play the last day. The last day in Manchester was rained out. The third test was England got a lead in the first innings, but then B.S. Chandrasekhar bowled them out in a single afternoon for 101. All right, now, so there's a lot of drama and excitement there too. Of course, where the present series scores over 1971 is that in 1971 we had a first strength team. All the best players were playing, right? The 11 players chosen on the day were all available, all fit. There was no one who had missed out because they were injured or had gone home for personal reasons. Here we lacked Kohli, our best batsman, and our three best bowlers, that is Ashwin, Bumrah, and Shami. So that sense, yes, I mean that certainly makes. But again, as I said, we went to England after having lost the last 8 tests in England, 8 out of 8. Whereas we went to Australia in 1971, we went to England after having lost 8 tests in a row in England. This year, last winter, we went to Australia having won the last series. So if you look at where Indian cricket is now and what it was then, I think they are on par. I mean, we can't really judge. But yes, I mean, apart from 1971, the greatest victory, it's appropriate that it comes 50 years after 1971.
Very interesting. And again, as DJ mentioned, neither of us were around. And so obviously, as folks who've studied the game, great to hear your perspective about 1971. I want to just ask you a quick question. You sort of touched upon this, but Dr. Guha, a big part of conversation as India has become more of a cricketing superpower, if you will, in the last decade or so, has been about superstar culture. And I know you've talked about this as well, et cetera. It's something that made the final test at Brisbane special, or at least let's call this whole series special, the lack of the superstar that stood out, because everybody performed at some point, from a Rahane to a Pujara to a Pant, every bowler to a Siraj Pfeiffer. Is that what made this, at least for fans today, more special, that we weren't relying on Sachin, we weren't relying on Kohli? Thoughts on that?
That, of course, and the fact that we were so humiliated in the first test when we were out for our lowest score ever. So to rebound from that, obviously, makes it that much more special. Not having Kohli, of course, not having Ashwin and Shami and Bumrah. So all of that, yes. I mean, it's really it's like, maybe in the Packer era, if a second-strung Australian team without all the Packer stars had beaten the West Indies, that's how it would feel like.
Yeah, and just one more quick follow-up from me. Obviously, a lot of the conversation as you think about India, Australia, is about 2001, right? Eden Gardens, Dravid, Lakshman. Obviously, that one was at home. So is that why you chose not to mention that one? Is that because of the home?
Yes, of course. And that was 3 tests. This is 4 tests. So we won over a 4-test series. And I think the draw. I think one of the things that was special about this series was the 3rd test match, the draw. The magic of the draw. I don't know whether either of you saw a piece I reposted in Scroll after the Sydney draw. This is a piece I wrote in 1996. When Jagmohan Dalmia was campaigning for the presidency of the ICC, and part of his manifesto was that I will eliminate the draw because the draw is so bloody boring. Every test match, according to Dalmia, had to have a result, and he was going to propose to the ICC that every test match becomes 90 overs in the first innings and 60 overs in the second innings. So the draw at Sydney, I mean, there's a magic to the draw. There's a magic and a mystique to the draw, which this series also brought back. The great draw is something. You remember, I mean, both of you would have been probably little boys when Michael Atherton played 10 or 11 hours against Donald and others to draw that match in South Africa.
I've actually watched the highlights of that, unfortunately.
So
185 not out, wasn't it?
Yeah. So it's not just victory. It's not just our 2 victories against their 1 victory, but the draw in Sydney, which was so dramatic and special. And that's something else that this series provided, which neither 2001 against Australia, 71 sort of provided it with that Lord's Test match, because, as I said, the first match in Lord's, we needed something like 30 runs to win. And Solkar was still there. So, of course, they was adding Bailey and Chandra. So that was also a draw. Any side could have won. But I think that draw, and Ashwin and Bihari playing out all those overs with such resolution and courage, I think was one of the great highlights of this series.
Absolutely. And we'll put a link in the show notes to your article called In Defense of the Draw at scroll.i. And there's also a great piece by Rohit Brijnath, who talked about the rhythms of Test cricket and what it brought out, that draw brought out in him. But just absolutely amazing. It is amazing for us to have you on this podcast to contrast this series with the 1971 series. Of course, we lived through 2001 and watched that turnaround, but it has been absolutely incredible. Dr. Guha, we are also here to talk about your latest book called The Commonwealth of Cricket. Um, uh, so we both read it, and I think my first reaction to it when I was reading it was, it's written in a very kind of, in a way that reminded me of the old PG Woodhouse. The start of it talks about a very old PG Woodhouse schoolboy cricket story. So one of the first books my dad ever gifted me was the Gold Bat and other stories, or the Pot Hunters and other stories, where there's a prefect's uncle, there's the Pot Hunters, the Gold Bat, and all of that. And the initial chapters of this book brought back those memories. And you, in fact, even mentioned the Jackson brothers in it, which is almost like you were reading my mind, which was absolutely incredible. It felt a little bit like a mix of those plus Roald Dahl's Boy, Bill Bryson's The Thunder Kid. And then it kind of just takes you back. So I've played cricket to not the highest level. I've played cricket to kind of state level. And that's a whole different story by itself. But it brought back the simplest memories for me, bowling to my dad as a 4-year-old. Because you mentioned bowling to your dad and beating with a leg break on the outside edge and then beating him on the inside with a googly. And it actually made me recall bowling to my dad in the driveway of my Calcutta house, which I don't think I've thought about for years. It made me recall going to play cricket early in the morning with the mist. And it's almost a trip down memory lane for readers along with you. And I think that's why it connects so well. Apart from the glitz and glamour of the international game, the focus is very much here on school cricket, club cricket, college cricket. And I think for me, that's what connected the most. So what prompted you to write this book, Dr. Guha?
Well, what prompted me to write this book was that I always knew I wanted to pay tribute to my uncle Dore, who was the hero of this book, who was my maternal uncle, who really inspired a love of cricket in me. And at some stage, there was a natural arc, starting a little boy in Dehradun, which is a backwater of cricket, and ending up inside the BCCI. But the title, The Commonwealth of Cricket, DJ, alludes to this fact, that it's not just test cricket. It's also school cricket, college cricket, Ranji cricket, club cricket, and backyard cricket. So all forms of cricket are part of this great universe of the game. Now, you mentioned P.G. Woodhouse. I don't know whether either of you know of a book called Woodhouse at the Wicket.
I haven't actually read that one. It's one of the few ones that I haven't read.
Ashwin, do you know this book?
I'm not familiar, actually, but I will read it now.
Delightful book. It's edited by an Australian journalist. I think his name is Murray Hedgecock. It's a collection of all Woodhouse's writings on cricket, fiction and non-fiction. There are even some portraits of matches. You know, there's a match that his old school Dulwich played, which he saw when he was an adult. Woodhouse played, I think, for his school team. And, you know...
yes, I've actually played at Dulwich College.
Okay.
I play cricket at Dulwich College, and his name is up there on the boards.
And famously,
as a school
he's supposed to have bunked work to see maybe, you know, a match at Lord's. So I think, yes, I mean, there obviously I read a lot of Woodhouse, not just the cricket stories growing up. But unlike Woodhouse, I think everyone in my book is true. You know, Woodhouse took real life incidents and then fictionalized them. So there's no real character in history called Mike Jackson, but there was someone like him, possibly in Dulwich or in a rival's club, on whom Woodhouse modeled his work. Just as his most famous character, Jeeves, is named after a Warwickshire all-rounder who died in the First World War. So, but because I wanted to pay tribute to my Uncle Dore, I wasn't sure what form it would take. Then what also happened, DJ, was that in 2018, I finished the second volume of my Gandhi biography, which is more than 1,000 pages long and has several thousand footnotes. So it's a book in which it's a work of scholarship, in which every assertion, every quote, every incident has to be footnoted. Okay, has to be footnoted. And when I finished that book, I wanted a release. I wanted to do a different kind of writing, unburdened by research, unburdened by consulting my notes from the archives, just from my mind. And that's how this book started. that's how it ended. And a very fine writer, Gulu Ezekiel, whose work you'll know, has pointed out, I think, 6 or 7 factual mistakes in this book, which I did check, which I corrected the paperback edition. But I'm glad there are a few factual mistakes, because, I've got, there's a one-day match in Bangalore, for example, where I describe a batsman whom I do not name running out Tendulkar. We actually won that match, and I say we lost it because so there are a few errors of that kind because it was written purely from memory without any sources. And it was a way of it was a release from serious, dense scholarly work burdened by footnotes.
Absolutely. And you talked about various forms of cricket, club cricket, street cricket. I mean, Edges and Sledges, Twitter handle is one tip, one hand. So we are very much of that nature. And the other thing that you talked about was eavesdropping on greatness, which is actually one of the titles of your chapters. And that's the other thing that struck such a note with me, because as I said, I've played cricket in Hyderabad with some of the guys who've gone on to play cricket for India. Ambati Raidu is the same age as me. We played at the juniors together.
Did you bowl a bat? Did you bowl a bat or both?
I did both. Okay. I started as a leg spinner like you, but I turned to seam bowling when I used to get hit out of the ground. So it was slightly more successful with the seam bowling. But also Manvinder Bisla was my captain of the under 17, under 19. He played a big innings in the IPL. So it's that being adjacent to an international cricketer. Raidu, of course, didn't go on to reach the greatness that some of your contemporaries did, but it allows you to connect yourself almost to the guys who've succeeded. And I think that's the other thing that the book brings out brilliantly. There are so many connections. The other thing was, you talked about YPS Patiala. One of my finest moments on a cricket field came against RIMC Dehradun, who you mentioned in the book, at YPS's ground in Patiala in 2003. It just brought back a flood of memories. As I said, I've not got any achievements as a cricketer in that of any note, but everyone who will read that book will connect with it in some way, is what I think I'm trying to get at. But right, so having gotten that out of the way, the nostalgia and the waves of memories that came to me, I think the other thing that struck me was you talking about moving beyond an appreciation for the game as being a game played by your country or your team, and appreciating the game as a whole and appreciating cricket for what it is. Now, something like the Ashes last year was obviously a very good example of that. The World Cup final last year when England played New Zealand, just cricket lovers would enjoy that. So what message do you have for listeners who are so of course, we're all invested in Team India and Indian cricket doing well, but how can they go beyond the narrowness of winning and losing with Indian cricket, and the despair that comes with losing, which feels like the world's about to end, and the elation that comes with winning, which means you're on the top of the world?
I think having played cricket, even at a modest level like you have, or you played slightly better cricket than me, but I think if you play cricket relatively seriously, it does two things. One is you appreciate true greatness. And in an earlier book of mine, Spin and Other Terms, which was published in 1994, I argue that if art critics are normally failed artists, so they're always looking to pick holes in an artist's work. Music critics are often failed musicians. Now, cricket writers are also failed cricketers, but they have no bitterness. Having failed to bowl an outswinger from the edge of the crease, when I saw Kapil Dev do it the same thing, I just go say, "Wah, wah, kya baat hai," right? So you glory in it. There is no envy or bitterness in a cricket writer who's failed in being a cricketer. There's only wonder and joy, and and exaltation. So I think that's part of what loving cricket is, and it's also loving cricket at all levels. And of course, when you're younger, I have a nephew who's cricket mad, who's a little younger than you. He also played decent cricket for his school and his college. He must be in his late 30s, and he's desperate for India to win. Maybe he'll outgrow it. Obviously, when I was young, I wanted India to win all the time, but I now just want a good match. I love watching club cricketers play. My primary loyalty, as I explained in this book, is to my club. not even to my state Karnataka, and still less to my country India. So it's cricket as an aesthetic experience, not cricket as combat, not cricket as mortal combat, but cricket as an aesthetic experience that really appeals to me, and that's what sustains me. That's because I played it so seriously for so long. And that's also because it's the aesthetics that appeals to me. I mean, people have commented on the fact that I can recall a catch that Azharuddin took at Manchester, in 1999. I can see it. Or on drive that much more obscure, on drive that Hari Gidwani played in a college match in 1974. Because it's the aesthetics that I think appeals to me as someone who loved the game and played it to distraction for many years as a young boy. So more than the result, the achievement is the aesthetics that appeals to me.
Dr. Guha, that's a very, very well put. And I think as somebody who was awake till 2 a.m. my time, as mentioned, I live in the US, watching Ashwin and Vihari bat a 50-ball partnership in 250 balls, you can't say it's the thrill of a normal sport, let's call it a more modern sport. But there's a beauty and a magic to it. As with anything that any of us appreciates or falls in love with, in this case the sport, you want to share it with others, right? And again, I live in the part of the world where I don't get to share it day to day with so many others. That's why I'm thankful for virtual technology and our podcast. But what do you think cricket needs to be able to spread? And again, I say this living in the US, which is a huge market for it to potentially grow to. Or on the flip side, do you think it doesn't need to? Are you of the belief that, hey, it's good where it is? We don't need to force more people to appreciate it for it to be great.
I think, again, I mentioned Jagmohan Dalmia, and I don't want to spend the show on knocking one guy who's no longer with us. But he was very keen to make cricket a global sport. That was unlike the abolition of the draw, this was a noble ambition, which I admired. But he failed. He wanted to take it to China. He wanted to make it an Olympic sport. In his time as the administrator, we had these knockout matches in Texas. We played in Toronto. Now all that is gone, right? Cricket geographically has shrunk back to what it always was, a sport played in the countries of the former British Empire or the current Commonwealth, right? So I don't think it's not a global sport. Because it's not a global sport, it should give us some perspective. Winning, a billion plus people producing a team that wins a test series against a country in which of 20 million people, in which cricket is the third most popular sport. To put these things in perspective, I think there is a problem with Indians loving cricket to distraction, in that Indian sports persons who are shooters and badminton players and tennis players never get the kind of fraction of the attention that they deserve, and so on and so forth. In my view, Vishwanathan Anand was as great a sports person as Sachin Tendulkar. If Tendulkar got the Bharat Ratna, Anand deserved it as much, without a question, because he was playing a world sport, competed for intensively in hundreds of countries. So I think cricket is going to be where it is, but it is aesthetically very special, very different from other sports, and my subtitle, A Lifelong Love Affair with the Most Subtle and Sophisticated Game Known to Humankind, is partly a tease. It is a piece of mischief, aiming to provoke those who love football and tennis and golf, but it's also partly sincere belief. Now, you mentioned this series. In many ways, there were so many moments in this series, but one moment that stood out for me, in fact, the only tweet in the 4 tests, because I don't really tweet much about cricket because it's really a private passion for me. I tweet about politics and society mostly. The only tweet I put out in these 4 tests till we won was in the second test, when Ashwin went round the wicket and had the dangerous Manas Labuschagne with a straight of one caught and slip, right? And I, also was an off spinner. I also sometimes bowled round the wicket, and more by accident than by design. The ball went straight, and my college captain Arun Lal, who was a magnificent slip fielder, occasionally caught it. But I said that was a classic. I said a classic off spinner's dismissal, and then I added T20 anyone question mark. All right, because there would be no slip, there would be no change of line, there would be no batsman well set pushing defensively forward. Right now, so that to me was what Test cricket is all about. So in that sense, we cannot become propagandists and proselytizers to make, we have failed in trying to make cricket a world sport. But this series should at least allow those of us who passionately believe in Test cricket, which includes DJ and you and many listeners to this podcast, to persuade Indians who are so crazy about T20 that there's much more to cricket than dhoom dham dharaka. You know, that the aesthetics of the game is what really sustains your love in the deepest sense, and that you can only get in a 5-day match.
I would absolutely agree with that. And in the interest of full disclosure, Dr. Guha, I think we should also clarify that we are T20 fans, having grown up watching the IPL from 2008. I would even go as far as venturing that Ashwin was discovered by the IPL, playing for the CSK. So without the IPL, arguable whether he would have got that exposure and made it in, etc., etc. It's a huge argument to be had. I know you've had it with Amit Verma on his podcast as well. Also, you said you won't remember what happened in the IPL final this year. We do, because we actually support the Delhi Capitals. So it is very forgettable for us. So we've tried to delete it. I wish we had forgotten all about it. But
I do, DJ, I want to clarify. I think it's an important clarification, though. And again, to each their own. But we are IPL fans, but we are also huge, as you can tell, fans of the Test game. So absolutely. I don't think on this show we look at it as necessarily one or the other. I think we're saying we are IPL fans, but we are also fans of the Test cricket. And I think there's a world where both can exist.
Yeah, and it's what you said in your book. It's Test cricket is Scotch. One day cricket is Indian-made foreign liquor. And the IPL is hooch. The addict needs his fix. And I make no bones about it. I am an absolute addict for it. I will watch 2 months of the IPL, but I stayed up till 7 a.m. in London watching the winning runs being hit in Australia, and I couldn't go to sleep. I'd been awake all night, and I think I slept for 10 hours the next day, but it was the most contented sleep I'd ever had. Maybe if Delhi had won the IPL, I would have slept for a shorter time, but I don't know. I think there is space in our minds, at least now, to probably compartmentalize the various formats. But of course, you've watched a lot more Test cricket and a lot more cricket than us. You've also been in the administration, and you've probably seen the murkier side of the IPL. But I want to come to that now, Dr. Guha. First up, there was the match fixing scandal, or the spot fixing scandal, that broke in 2013. There were petitions made in the Supreme Court. There was the Mudgal Committee. There was the Lodha recommendations. And then there was the Committee of Administrators that was formed. You were interviewed by the Supreme... Was it the Supreme Court that interviewed you, or one of the justices that interviewed you?
No one interviewed... Well, yeah. The Lodha
stakeholder in the game.
The Lodha
so the Lodha Committee.
Yeah, I was one of those who deposed before it, yeah.
As a cricket writer, you were a stakeholder, and you were interviewed. And then you were offered the honor to join that Committee of Administrators. You thought about it, and you took counsel from various people. Obviously, Bishan Singh Bedi, one of your great friends and heroes, helped you out with that decision. Some people said yes, some people said no. But what prompted you to finally accept that offer?
I think, I was persuaded that the court was sincere in its desire to clean up Indian cricket. And maybe, it was kind of, and I hadn't asked for that. I was an outsider of the game. Cricket writing wasn't my main business. And I thought it was what the word you used was an honor to be asked to serve on that committee. I admired the amicus curiae Gopal Subramaniam for the work he'd done. I knew he had a very high reputation for his probity and his intellect. So I joined. And, I don't regret it, because it was a very interesting experience being there. And it kind of also, it was a culmination of a life as a cricket fan, to start from a little boy playing in Dehradun to being in the belly of the beast. But I think I very quickly realized that the Supreme Court was losing interest, and that committee was ill-equipped to tackle the major problems that confronted us, principally because we did not have a senior male cricketer in the committee.
And you recommended, obviously, Javagal Srinath as the person with integrity.
It did not have to be Javagal Srinath. In retrospect, I now realize I could have recommended Arun Lal, and the reason I did not recommend Arun Lal was he was my college captain, So I may have felt it is kind of nepotism to recommend someone like him. But and there would be others. I mean, maybe Lakshman. I mean, a senior cricketer of experience, intelligence, and integrity in that committee, I think would have been able to push the board towards more meaningful reforms. Eventually, what happened? Conflict of interest remained unresolved. One of the most obnoxious things about Indian cricket is Ganguly advertising cricketing products as president of the board. It's unconscionable. It's unthinkable anywhere else in the world. What did our committee do? What did the Supreme Court do? It inherited, it took the BCCI away from N. Srinivasan and Rajiv Shukla, and it gave it to N. Srinivasan and N. Srinivasan's daughter and Amit Shah's son. Right. So if we look at it's as the administration is as sick, as compromised, as politicized as ever before. I mean, just give you a side of what's happening now. England is coming to play 4 test matches. 2 are in Madras because of N. Srinivasan, whose shenanigans started the whole problem with the cricket board, and 2 are in Ahmedabad because Jay Shah, whose only qualification is that he's Amit Shah's son, nothing else. He's from Ahmedabad. So what could be more nepotistic and more sick than this? I mean, I wish cricket lovers. I mean, why should there be 2 matches in Madras and 2 matches in Ahmedabad just because of the power brokers who control Indian cricket? I mean, just think of that, right? So we Indian fans are too forgiving. We won in Australia, so all the crimes are forgotten. I mean, hats off to Ravi Shastri for his good stewardship of the team in Australia. But he's the same man who called Lalit Modi the Moses of Indian cricket. And where is Lalit Modi? A refuge and exile in London, a criminal who's in exile in London. So I can't come back to India for fear of being, interrogated. Likewise with Vijay Mallya. So I think, I'm someone who believes in principle, who believes in ethics. It's not an accident that the 2 heroes of this book are Bishan Singh Bedi and my uncle Dore, because they're people of character, not just cricket, just not regular cricket lovers who will, do anything. Who will broker any kind of deal to further their personal nest or their personal interest. So in that sense, I was naive. I was naive in thinking that a committee of 4 people to clean up the mother of all messes. And I was even more naive in thinking the Supreme Court would stay the course. Under Justice Thakur, it was interested in doing something. After Justice Thakur left, subsequent Chief Justices lost interest. And that may be, that may only be because there's so many other things that a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court has to deal with, and that cricket administration is of relatively minor importance in the life of the nation.
And of course, a lot of people didn't follow what the conflict of interest issue was. So just to explain what that was, there was Rahul Dravid, who was the coach of the under-19 team and the India A team, and was also the mentor for the Delhi Daredevils and asking players to come and try out for them. There was also a BCCI contracted commentator, Sunil Gavaskar, who was running his professional management group company, which was managing these players. It was almost, I think you've mentioned in your book that they bought the silence of these commentators by contracting them to the BCCI. They had taken the telecast rights and were producing their own content, which is not done anywhere else in the world. I mean, there's a whole raft of issues. So if the first half of the book is about your love for cricket and nostalgia, I think
actually more than the first half. I mean,
more than the first half.
I mean, only 2 out of 11 chapters are about the BCCI.
That is true, and those 2 chapters actually.
And DJ, because I explicitly end on a nostalgic and elegiac note. I end with a celebration, with a chapter celebrating the game, because I didn't want to
indeed.
If that's up. Yeah, go ahead.
Indeed, but those 2 chapters for a lover of Indian cricket, I think, are just. They make you so angry, because even for someone who follows the game so closely, you were someone who was in the eye of the storm. You were corresponding with these players, these commentators, you were meeting them, and these are legends of the game. There are people like Sunil Gavaskar that have resisted these issues. And I mean, of course, there was the, you don't watch the IPL because you can't stand the commentary, but I mean, the hyper-nationalism that was on display on the Fox Sports feed, I don't know whether you've seen that.
No.
Warren and Mark Waugh and things, it was unbearable. So I think you don't watch, you don't like watching Indian cricket commentators either, because they don't criticize Indian players enough.
Frankly, they're also boring and dull. They don't add value to what I'm seeing on the box. I mean, unlike Warren or Atherton Holding, they don't add value to what I'm seeing on the box.
I'm not sure Warren adds much value. I have a very strong feeling
Okay.
against Shane
I
Warne.
think the last test brought him out at his worst because he was so desperate for Australia to win. Again, you've got recency bias, DJ. Look at here Warren commenting on West Indies against England, and you'll see what he knows about.
And Warren on the field when he's mic'd up bowling. Incredible. The man's mind is incredible.
This desperation for Australia to win the last series.
It was
brought him out at first, for sure.
I have to say, but the last question, and I would urge anybody who's interested in cricket administration and the issues that the BCCI face to read this book. But the last question for us is Anil Kumble, legend of the game, coach of the Indian cricket team, left his post after the Champions Trophy. The Champions Trophy India was never meant to go to if the old guard had their way, according to your book. What went on there? Because again, it's something that's very murky for Indian cricket followers, that a coach that has been so successful, so strategic, so tactically sound, having to leave his post in those circumstances and being replaced by Ravi Shastri. It may be borne out now with Ashwin's video saying Ravi Shastri was the person saying, wear this 36 all out as a badge and all of that. But back then it seemed very, very strange. And Indian cricket fans probably felt a little bit hurt at what happened and the treatment that was given to Anil Kumble.
You see, it's not about individuals, DJ. It's about process and procedure. You know, as I said, in no game in the world, the Lionel Messi cannot choose the coach of Barcelona. Even Federer can't choose the coach of the Swiss Davis Cup team, which is an ephemeral competition. So it's the veto, it's the supercar culture. This is not about Anil Kumble. It's about the supercar culture. You know, the Dhoni had a veto on commentators. You know, Harsha Bhogle went away because he said something uncritical of Dhoni, and he had to, it took him a long time to come back, and he's probably our best commentator. Right. Sanjay Manjarekar had to grovel to come back. Now, this kind of thing is the supercar culture that is a problem, not a particular individual. You know, it's not Shastri versus Kumble. It's a question of what does it take to run a body professionally, transparently, according to due process. That is what I was worried about.
Yeah, very interesting, Dr. Guha. DJ and I think could spend all day talking about cricket with you and learning from you, but we want to be respectful of time as well. So, one thing I'll quickly mention is, if you haven't read the book, please do. For those who are the Commonwealth of Cricket, for those who haven't had a chance to read it yet, the publishers at Harper Collins have been very generous and allowed us to do a giveaway on this show. So what we're asking our listeners is to tweet out at us, put on social media, Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, the answer to the question for you, linking back to the subtitle of the book. So according to you, write into us with, why is cricket the most subtle and sophisticated game known to humankind? Okay, so for our listeners, tweet at us, Facebook, Instagram, post it there with the link to this show, and we'll enter you in a draw to get a chance to win the book. But Dr. Guha, before we wrap this up, we put a question out there saying, hey, for our listeners, does anybody have questions for Dr. Guha? We were overwhelmed. We got a lot of questions in. I'm not going to hit them all. You've covered some of them, but I'm hoping to rapid fire a few of them with you if you'll do us the honor. So first question came in from Karthik on Twitter. Isn't the IPL a factor in how these young debutants were able to handle such a large amount of pressure?
Possibly. But let's not forget Pujara, who's never got an IPL contract. I think young Indians today are much more entrepreneurial in every walk of life. It's to do with transformations in our economy, in our society, in mobility, many more people moving from villages to town, from towns to large cities. So there's a larger churning going on, which makes people more daring, more experimental, much less cautious, much less risk averse than Indians, professional Indians in my generation. There's a wider sociological change taking place.
Fair enough. Very well said. The next question came in from Shreyant Singh, who said, here's my question. Why did India have trouble producing lethal fast bowlers before Bumrah, Shami and Umesh, who could constantly bowl at 145 clicks plus, while other countries didn't?
Well, I'm not an expert on this, but I think, legacy is very important. Kapil Dev inspired people like Srinath and Venkatesh Prasad. Srinath inspired people like Zahir Khan, and now this accumulative impact where we have these first straight fast bowlers. We started preparing more friendly wickets at home, less spin friendly wickets, at least in Ranji Trophy matches. Again, there's this is linked to the economic and social transformation of India. Sports persons had access to better diets, better medical advice, fitness training, and so on and so forth. And it's striking that for the first time when we went to Australia before the injuries, almost for the first time overseas, Indian bowling was much better equipped than Indian batting. Even 10, 15 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, we had Lakshman, Sehwag, Tendulkar, Dravid, and we couldn't win abroad because we didn't have the matches, the bowlers. And this just, is proof that in Test cricket, it's the bowling that matters. You have to get 20 wickets, even if you score 1,000 runs, as Sri Lanka did against us in a match, they didn't win the Test match. But I think it's cumulative. It's Kapil Dev starts a lineage that gathers strength and force as it goes along.
Yeah, very well said. I could say anecdotally for those of us, growing up in the 90s, 2000s, if I wasn't able to watch all 3 sessions on all 5 days of a test, I would prioritize watching India bat, right? If I was at school or college. Today, I almost prioritize watching us come on to bowl with the new ball. And that's a testament to just how brilliant the transformation
Absolutely.
is. Yeah. Okay, next question came in from Jyoti on Twitter. If you had to pick just one set of play or one session that changed the outcome of the recent India-Australia series, which would it be?
Again, unfortunately, because of my other, commitments, and my age, I didn't get up at 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock and watch the whole thing. I watched it in snatches. But to me, that partnership between Ashwin and Bihari, because of, the fortitude and the resolve that they showed, and because for me, the draw is so important in the mystique of Test cricket, probably that partnership. But again, I should also say I dislike singling out one event because it was 4 Test matches with so much drama and so many high points.
Very well said. All right, last 2 rapid fire questions. One from Gurkirat Singhil. How do you feel about how the current administration, let's call it the BCCI and the ICC, are handling women's cricket?
I am not following the administration, so I can't comment on it.
Okay, fair enough. And then I'll wrap up with a slightly more positive question. You're obviously, who comes from Ganesh Kamath on Twitter as well. You're obviously passionate about cricket. Who is your favorite cricketer of all time?
Again, as I said, I don't like to single out.
Can I take a guess though from your book? It sounds like it's Gandappa Vishwanath.
No.
I was going to guess Bishan Singh Bedi.
No, it's not even. It's neither of them. I would say that as a historian, I think the greatest Indian cricketer of all time was Vinu Mankad. And in my stint at the BCCI, I truly regret not succeeding in having a match on his centenary, 12th April 2007, one IPL match dedicated to him because the BCCI was too scared of the sponsors. I think Vinu Mankad, and he was also my Uncle Dore's hero, but as an all-round cricketer, he was just phenomenal. One of the few selfies I've taken. I don't take many selfies. They're not allowed with living people. I've taken selfies with statues. I took a selfie with a statue of Verghese Kurian at his alma mater, Michigan State University, the great founder of Amul. And I took a selfie with Vinu Mankad outside the Jamnagar Cricket Stadium. So in that sense, Vinu Mankad, probably, because also as a historian, I didn't see him, so Vinu Mankad would be the one.
And he bats at number 6 in your all-time India 11 as well, and bowls his left-arm spin.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Dr. Guha, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on this show, but the show is called Edges and Sledges. So before we wrap, I just want to ask you a quick question. Were you you were an off-spinner, from the sound of it, quite an aggressive off-spinner as well on the field, taking wickets. Did you sledge batsmen, or do you have a good sledging story that you can tell us? Because you mentioned Vishwanath's sledging story, how he sledged his boyhood friend and then his friend didn't speak to him at all. But any good sledging stories that you can give our listeners?
No, in our time, we didn't really sledge. I was playing the mid-70s. We were very courteous and civilized. But that Vishwanath story I tell in the book, please read it, because, I don't think it's ever been told before. I heard Vishwanath tell this story at the centenary of a Bangalore club about why he gave up sledging, and buy the book maybe only for that story about why Vishwanath gave up sledging.
It's a beautiful story. So definitely do buy the book. Please enter the giveaway as well. Ashwin has provided you the details. Write into us on Twitter, tweet the link of the show, and tell us why you think that cricket is the most subtle and sophisticated game of all time. Dr. Guha, as Ashwin said, we could spend hours just learning from you, but we have to end the show at this stage. We would love to have you back on the show at some stage, time permitting. But until then, thank you so much for your time. And thank you for writing these amazing, amazing books about cricket. And yeah, we hope that Indian cricket prospers and fans like us have more and more to look forward to.
Thank you, Ashwin. Thank you, DJ.